So thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks to Doug and the organizers for allowing me to present. My name is Wes Lim. I'm a lecturer in German studies at the Australian National University. And I specialize in dance studies and screen studies. And I'm happy here to share my work and also to hear about everyone else's work as well. So this is just to start what I'm going to present to you today. And these ideas are very new. I just wrote this a couple of days ago. So I'm interested to hear what other people have to say. So performance plays a central role in the popular neo-noir Netflix series Babylon Berlin, with dance in particular being thoroughly interwoven into the complex plot. Called a postmodern mashup, it allows viewers to fall down a, quote, rabbit hole of intertextuality, of both chronistic and anachronistic pastiche, and to revel in a fantasy world. Taking an intermedial approach using several performative lens, predominantly gestural and dance movements, but also costuming, lyrics, and camera work, I analyzed the performance of the cross-dressing figure Svetlana Zorokina dressed in drag as Nikoros singing Zu Asche zu Staub in the Mocha FD nightclub, variety theater, and brothel. And you see the figure in the middle with the spotlight. In addition to this character, 4 female background dancers move in costuming and choreography, citing Josephine Baker's Banana Dance. In this scene, the audience also knows the choreography and dances with the spectacle, as you see here. So Kim Wilkins has astutely argued that, quote, through the bifocal gaze, Babylon Berlin partakes often simultaneously in the 2 seemingly divergent iterations of Berlin's heritage, the celebrated legacy of the Weimar era and the dark history of Nazism. The image repertoire generated by this bifocal gaze ultimately dramatizes Siegfried Krakauer's famous thesis in From Caligari to Hitler, not only portraying the rise of fascism, but facilitating its promotion, end quote. While her reading focuses on scenes from the entire series, my reading will focus just on the one dance scene. It will further demonstrate that the use of dance support Wilkins' bifocal gaze reading by elaborating on and engaging with both Weimar era dance styles and perhaps most importantly, a futuristic aesthetics. And that's one of the things I'm kind of investigating in this paper today, that many have argued to fascism. A futurist aesthetic in dance remains largely underdeveloped, but demonstrates strong representation in Babylon Berlin. In regard to the events during the Weimar period, Kate Ellswood maintains that they functioned as rehearsals for modern citizenship, providing opportunities for spectators to test possibilities in a suspended space without necessarily committing. In this optimistic light, we can see the utopian potential of so many ideas circulating at the time. More pessimistically, we can see a failure to commit to the real world or the diffusion of tensions, end quote. I believe this tension manifests itself in this dance scene. So I'm trying something a little bit new. For me, this is new. I'm basically going to presenting you the scenes through GIFs. So there will not be any kind of music, but they have the ability to kind of repeat themselves. And whilst I'm talking, there won't be any music so that you can at least hear me present and do the analysis. So I hope this works out and you can let me know how that goes. So the Countess Svetlana Zorokina, who dresses in drag as Nikoros, enters the stage as the audience claps. The camera shoots at an angle from below with the spotlight coming from above and slowly tracks from left to right around. The cross-dressing figure wears a black top hat, black leather trench coat, black leather gloves, black vest, white button down, and black tie. The arms to the side, but extended at a 45-degree angle, chanting, "To ashes, to dust, taken away from the light. Zu Asche, zu Staub, dem Licht geraubt." The band behind Zorokina plays a soft but constant rumbling beat to allow the viewer to be able to hear the chanting, which you unfortunately cannot hear, but also functions to build tension. Next, the figure seems to perform a sustained and direct military salute while chanting, "But not just yet. Miracles wait until the end. Doch noch nicht jetzt. Wunder warten bis zuletzt." A slow crane shot shows the audience also chanting. These opening 30 seconds introduce the place and the characters that carry the narrative throughout the series. The notion of performance is established through the stage and the intense watching and even participation of onlookers through chanting. The spotlight focuses the attention on Zorokina as a mysterious figure in the shadows. On the one hand, they represent the Weimar representation of the Hosenroller or trouser roll, but also a BDSM Hitler figure. As Germanist and gender scholars Katie Sutton writes, quote, as a piece of clothing historically gendered male, trousers represent an important symbol of virility and can be used to signify the assessing of masculine privileges and protections, enabling actions that would be impossible in a skirt or dress. The public had a need to engage on a non-threatening and familiar level with the masculinization of women. By situating the masculine woman within the strict spatial and temporal constraints of an overtly fictional theatrical performance, audiences were provided with a safe and simultaneously titillating brand of female masculinity that only rarely challenged the dominant social order. While Zorokina embodies many of these characteristics, as we will see, the performance continues to on with both an exciting as well as threatening end. The black leather indicates Nazism and militarization that both demonstrate the fallen and injured soldiers from World War I, but also the virility of fascism, keeping Susan Sontag's fascinating fascism essay in mind. The camera view from slightly below shows the figure on a higher level as a praised charismatic leader who leads the dance spectacle, allowing for the erasure of intellect and investment purely in the body. Veronika Fürchner calls Sorokina's appearance as Hitler drag, and the song resembling Zara Leander's fascist wartime ballad, Ich weiß, es wird einmal ein Wunder geschehen, I know a miracle will happen. And Julia Schneeringer sees Marlene Dietrich and sees a Marlene Dietrich and David Bowie mashup with a crooning deep voice. She also notices how, quote, it also echoes Madonna, particularly her Metropolis-inspired video for Express Yourself from 1989, while the robotic movements move on stage and on the floor, dance floor echo Michael Jackson, end quote. I'll return to the comments about this robotic movement later. A single clarinet plays an ascending scale in variations to which Sorokina creates two fists and pantomime swallowing them slowly and then with increasing speed. During this scene, she seems to look at Nusin, and that's the guy that you've just seen in the other shot, through a reaction shot, who sits up and more closely demonstrating a look of mild confusion, but also extreme titillation. This gesture in the black gloves signal violence through the act of punching, directional movement and directional intense movement, but also pleasurable BDSM pleasure. While at first the slow, direct, aggressive, and decisive movement may seem to confound the audience, the change to quicker repetition allows the gesture to trail off and relax this tension. Just as the dancing audience has been chanting with Sorokina the entire time, they now begin unquestioningly performing this movement themselves. Sorokina now takes off the jacket and top hat, dramatically throwing them to the side as another spotlight shines frontally as the figure points directly in front with the index finger and raises it above. The audience follows along, cheering and clapping as the brass triumphantly swell on an ascending scale. While this direct and sustained movement demonstrates decisiveness and assertiveness, it is later diffused at its peak and at a sudden change to an uplifting, upward-facing palm, showing a release in tension and a more welcoming, carefree ethos. Here, the swift slippage between fascist and Weimar aesthetic. So here, right, the background is blue, I think what I'm looking at, and then as soon as it reaches the top, it swells and then turns purple. I mean, that's something I'm gonna have to look at again, but also is a release in this tension that I'm looking at. Up until now, Zorokina's movement qualities have been relatively slow, sustained, direct, often associated with tension. The rest of her dance incorporates a robotic or machine-like aesthetic that appears less in an expressionistic style, Ausdruckstanz, and the involuntary gesticulations of an epileptic dance. Here we go. The figure periodically performs 3 rigid and abrupt clapping gestures overhead with uncomfortably raised shoulders as the dancing crowd moves freely. Next, Zorokina executes machinic torso movements, bending from the waist to the right and then to the back. Kate Ellsworth's chapter on imagining the dance machine explains how robotic aesthetics found itself on the Weimar stage. Soldiers witnessed technological advancement in modern warfare through machine guns, tanks, and long artillery, which caused massive death and injury and enhanced the appearance of prosthetic limbs. She writes, quote, "In the world, the progress of the human-machine hybrid was defined by its ability to function better through its augmentation. Like the wearer of prosthetic limbs, it did not matter which parts connected to which, so long as they produced or surpassed the work of the whole," end quote. However, it's not altogether clear why Zorokina's first has tense, sustained fascist movements and then imitates those of a machine. That's something else I have to work on and think about. All right. So suddenly appearing behind Zorokina, 2 on each side, are 4 white dancers wearing thongs, artificial bananas that form the skirt, pasties, and slick back black caps. These costumes imitate Josephine Baker's look in Banana Dance. Their movements also resemble appropriate Baker's dancing, particularly the position in which they jut their backsides with knees bent and arched back, bending forward, that pose. Likely drawn from film and photographs of Baker. The end of the dance features 4 dancers behind Zorokina with mostly their heads and extremities exposed to create a kind of millipede effect, like the Tiller girls. While Zorokina invitingly raises the right hand, palm faced up, the dancers perform a scooping motion with their arms. And this is not shown here, but this is the end, breaking out of the line with 2 or each sides of the figure. They perform a kick to step out of the line and perform a smooth C curve and contrast it with mechanical arms. The final dance scene ends with the 4 dancers with their backs to the audience and their arms raising abruptly from the waist to overhead, while also leaning back and eventually falling to the ground. In reading the second portion of the dance through a futurist lens, I consult Marinetti's Manifesto of Futurist Dance from 1917, in which he outlines the parameters of this form, and through 3 examples, focused on aestheticized modern war images through violence and flight, entitled the Shrapnel Dance, the Machine Gun Dance, and the Dance of the Aviatrix. Marinetti writes, quote, "We futurists prefer Loie Fuller and the African-American cakewalk, the utilization of electric light and mechanical movements." And he lays out the aesthetics as being anti-harmonic, ill-mannered, anti-gracious, asymmetrical, synthetic, dynamic, and word-freeist. Free wordist, I'm sorry. Gabriele Brandstätter reads the cakewalk as, quote, "a principle of grotesque movement, representing the non-beautiful, the primitivism of futurist barbarismo, the offensive, and a form of movement aesthetics that accentuates the technical concept of interruption, i.e. the angular, jerky, syncopated movement rhythms of the cakewalk, rather than organic flow," end quote. Brandstätter believes that futurists are more interested in the, quote, "implication of dance" than in the genuine conception of an avant-garde aesthetic that treated dance as an independent phenomenon and movement of space, end quote. While the banana dance is not the cakewalk, it does have some features, at least through their eyes, that could apply to the 4 banana skirt girls with their jerky movement and angular movement. Despite the smooth and flowing movement that also integrated into the choreography, The machinic ending and aesthetic of interruption combined with Sorokina's singing, and here is the quotation from the lyrics, "You are so close to death, yet your glance so clear, see me, I am ready and looking for immortality. Du bist dem Tod so nah und doch dein Blick so klar, erkenne dich, ich bin bereit und such dir die Unsterblichkeit." Demonstrate first the transformation of a human into a robot and defy the lead of a charismatic fascist leader, which could also end in an ecstatic finish. And following Zorokina's lead can also be more acutely seen in this next part. So before the ending, there is a dance interlude that involves both the performers and the audience who are already familiar with the choreography, implying the regularity of the dance at the Moki Efti and perhaps cult-like status of these proceedings. The sound accompaniment no longer consists of Zorokina's crooning and brass, but just the drums, as if to get the head, take the head to the heart of the rhythm. Everyone starts running in place. This exaggerated motion clearly reflects the theatrical approach, or even pantomiming seen in silent films, and reminiscent of the machinic synchronicity of the Tiller Girls. However, periodic looks behind, narratively suggesting that they are being followed, and a constant starting and stopping of movement by stepping forward and then back convey indecision instead of machinic flow. Standing up, and the next one. So standing up straight and then peering around the corner, relaying the need to be undetected. This pantomiming sequence reads as if they are a perpetrator on the run. The music changes to a light brush of cymbals as Zorokina and the dancers perform a variation of a shimmy in which each shoulder alternate in being raised in tempo, stepping first to the right and cocking the head to the right signals the switch over to the other side. At this point, all the lights begin to flash and everyone dances in a freestyle movement to exercise their own individuality. During this sequence, the camera closes up using medium shots of the four dancers, singers, and the dancing audience, and a tracking shot of the drummer to convey the lively atmosphere of panoramic overview. Patrizia Veroli remarks the futurist dance was largely improvised, purposefully transient, and lacked a developed aesthetic and technique, leaving to doubt if futurist dance even really exists. Drawing inspiration heavily from the form of the variety theater, futurist dance embraced, quote, breaking up the dramatic unity of the spectacle through its splitting into several short acts, each independent from the other, the mixing of performance genres, the involvement of the audience in the spectacle, the use of ironic gags, the replacement of mysterious atmospheres and psychological nuances with body madness or physicophilia, the use of electronic light to innovate in innovative and unexpected ways, dramatic forms of presentation, sexual relationships devoid of any trace and cheerful sentimentality, and instead characterized by eroticism and aggressiveness. Veroli's summary strikingly maps relatively well onto the performance of Zorokina and the four banana scroll dancers and its interactive effect on the audience. The Moki FD is not just a variety theater, but also a club and a brothel. Although this act seems to combine different genres instead of holding them separately, they do focus on the spectacular and participation. Body madness is demonstrated through the jerky movement and sexual nature of the throat fisting, and the throat fisting evokes an aggressive feel. So in closing, this dance scene seems to explore futurist tropes, even though there are previously very clearly established examples from history. Besides the Weimar era styles and the fascist aesthetics, which are more clearly seen here, the futurist aesthetics helps provide more slippage, but also demonstrates its possibilities. Thank you.
Get questions to stand up on the podium. We can invite them to the podium.
Okay.
I will unmute and ask a question.
Okay. Can Wesley hear me now?
He cannot hear you now.
Yes.
Oh, you can? You can hear me, Wesley?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
can hear it.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. So we're gonna have a few minutes for questions for you. So people are gonna come up here to the podium and ask those questions
Awesome.
individually.
Great.
Are there questions before starting? Yeah, okay. Here comes Claudia Koffenberg.
Great.
Hi there. Thanks very much.
Hi.
So I have I'm very interested. I mean, a lot of arts formats, practices tend to facilitate a sort of interim moment of freedom and then shut down, particularly when it comes to women and faith. So I'm thinking here opera, for example. Yeah, opera is a format that facilitates sort of wild and female freedom and sexuality and power, female power, and then at the end the heroine always has to die. So I'm interested here in what you think in terms of Weimar, maybe what it might be about this moment in time that actually facilitates the possibility of freedom without penalties within its art form. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I guess I would just go back to what Ellswood had talked about, that this kind of experimental place with terms of performance, but also this the action of the self-performance of turning oneself into what one would like to be in this kind of fantasy world. Yeah, it just relates back to this idea of a space in which this type of thing could happen, and to think about how that actually would function in the real world, I think. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, Anne.
So I was really interested in your analysis of what was happening on stage, and I wanted to ask you if you could make a connection between the movement on stage and the movement in the theater, or in the dancers who weren't on stage, and not just when they perhaps mirror one another, but also what was going on kind of narratively in terms of the performers on stage and then the dancers who are in the
Sure. Yeah, so I tried to focus mainly on the spectacle, and I guess from the perspective of the dancers or the people watching, that was the perspective I was looking at. But I think within the whole narrative, it's also quite complex. It's not something that I went into because it would take a while to just kind of do the explanation. But the main thing is you saw one of them, they showed one of the characters, there was the man watching the dancer. But then also when you see the dancers in kind of the group setting, there is there's the aspiring, and the shots weren't as good, but shows an aspiring type of the new woman for the Weimar era, and she's trying to be she's trying to work in the murder commission as well as part of the police force, but it just basically shows her kind of having an open lifestyle with trying to build and have this kind of career that's basically only has men working in it, but is also is a sex worker. That's not shown as well, but also is kind of flirtatious with other men while she's at the club as well. So that's one of the things that's happening here. And I think probably what this tries to aim at is kind of losing oneself in this kind of relationship to the body and experiencing the beautifulness that the body has, and not having any kind of inhibitions whilst one is dancing, but also realizing the fact of what's happening in this kind of spectacle as a bit of an admonishment that actually no one had seen as much, not until, for instance, Kakawa, the intellectual, had done this retrospective kind of look to look for clues within culture about what was going on and how things during the Weimar Republic actually demonstrated signs of reaching that were pointing actually toward Nazism later. Yeah, National Socialism. Yeah.
Hello, Wesley.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Pamela Cranville. I'm really excited about this work, primarily because I wasn't actually familiar with the show before, so you really
Oh, yeah.
just peaked. I wanted to ask, in your, I appreciate your really narrow focus on just trying to unpack this spectacle. I also appreciate, the Krakauer reference and the discussion of how this sort of fits into larger concerns about the fascist potentiality in spectacle, right?
Yeah.
And so I was wondering whether you could speak a little bit more about the role of the camera in all of this, because everything you said about the body rings really true to me. And I'm wondering, as a Netflix series, right, that is aiming at a relatively international audience, because of where all it's streaming, what is the camera doing not only to sort of educate us, for lack of a better term, about this sort of liminal moment, and just talking about liminality, right? This slow shift away from the Weimar aesthetic and like slipping through futurism into fascism. In what ways is the camera also doing some of that work, or at least asking us to experience the feeling of that slippage through spectacle? Not a very well articulated question, but yes, the camera. Talk to me about the camera.
No, I totally understand. Yeah. And that was one of the things I think I ended up not really focusing on because I just became so fixated just on the movement and trying to figure out what the movement was actually trying to tell me. That, yeah, unfortunately, I've neglected the kind of camera, what the camera was doing. But I just noticed that a lot of it is, there's a lot of switching and a lot of, how would you say, there are lots of frequent cuts to different angles, at least to the perspective, which of course gives us more this kind of panoramic view of what's going on in there as well. And for me, at least, makes it feel like it's more of a, like puts us more in the spectator, more in the position of actually feeling like we're actually there. But also gives us the notion that we're also kind of omniscient in the whole kind of gathering as well. So it's not just that we have one position, but we see the position of many people. I think that's really interesting about the whole thing, and actually pulls you in and wraps you up into this dance. And what's interesting is that this is actually used for the scene that I drew from is the one that's drawn from the actual film series, but this has also been used into making the what's it called? Making the music video. And if you tailor this and you watch it along with the music video, a lot of the dance sequences are actually cut out, and they're imposed on these are kind of scenes from the actual Netflix series. So it's also kind of thing that kind of wants to draw the audience in, showing them kind of the narrative that's also going on in the film, and basically tries to get people to watch the series as well as a kind of an advertising marketing kind of thing. But that's one of the things that I kind of noticed was the dancing, those two kinds of versions, which I didn't get to talk about, but pull things in. And I was just focusing mostly on the dancing bit. Yeah, great question. Thank you.
Wesley, we're gonna have to wrap it up, but I want to.
No worries.
And I guess it's time for a round of applause.
Thanks a lot for coming, everyone.